Dumelang, welcome to Face the Nation. My name is Clement Manyatela. It's great to have you with us here on SABC News. On the show tonight, former President Thabo Mbeki was on the ground today campaigning for the ANC after a very long time. But how far are these efforts going to go? What impact will having him campaign for the party have on its electoral outcome? Can the former president help save the ANC from potentially dipping below 50%? The ANC's head of elections, Mdumiseni Ntuli, joins us tonight. Also on the show, the DA says the ANC has had nothing but broken promises for the people of Gauteng since our dawn of democracy. Is that a fair assessment by the DA? And what does the DA itself have to offer for the people of Gauteng? The DA's Gauteng Premier candidate, Solly Msimanga, joins us. Now, Solly Msimanga and Mdumiseni Ntuli are facing the nation tonight. But first, my comment. Now, former President Thabo Mbeki was in Soweto today campaigning for the ANC ahead of elections next month. This is the first time, probably in about 17 years, that we see him on the ground with ANC comrades in party regalia going door to door, which makes this quite a significant moment, right, as the governing party intensifies its election campaign. I would argue that the ANC needs Thabo Mbeki now more than ever, especially since the former president, Jacob Zuma, is campaigning for the MK party, also because the ANC faces the possibility of dipping below 50% in these elections. So the question now is, what difference will having him in the election campaign have on the ANC's electoral outcome? Because the ANC clearly believes he can help turn things around for the party that, quite frankly, many people believe is on the verge of losing power. So is he a vote getter? Can he bring in that pool of voters that the ANC desperately needs? I think it's important to remember that his favorability ratings are quite high. That's Thabo Mbeki, high among ANC leaders. There's a survey that was released in November by the Social Research Foundation that revealed that he was the most popular and most admired politician, beating even President Cyril Ramaphosa and even the former President Jacob Zuma. So he is still seen as a man of integrity. He's still popular in Gauteng, especially among the middle class. This is what he told the residents in Soweto while campaigning today.
Ngiyathembisa ukuthi ke mangisithi votelani ANC. Ngithembisa ukuthi sizayilungisa ANC leyo ngokwayo. Kwenzela ukuthi kwazi ngempela ukumela abantu yenze lento kufanele yenze.
So that's what he said while he was in Soweto earlier today. But he wasn't sure last year whether he should continue campaigning for a party that, at least according to him, wasn't serious about its renewal agenda. Remember what he said during his address at UNISA last year? In fact, I'm going to quote what he had said. He said, "I say to the ANC comrades that when you say I must go campaigning next year, to say to the people, vote ANC. How am I going to do that? To say vote ANC when I know very well that the branch of the ANC in this constituency is led by a criminal." So what's clear here is the former president wasn't happy last year that the renewal agenda of the ANC wasn't taking shape. But is it taking shape now? Does he think that the ANC is serious now about that renewal agenda? He was asked this question today, and whether or not he had changed his mind, and this was his response.
I've never changed my mind. I said to the ANC, the same point I'm making now. As ANC, it's necessary for the ANC to attend to its own internal problems, which they are. When the ANC said to itself, we must renew ourselves, that was very good. It comes from conferences. It was correct. The ANC must renew itself. Those are conference decisions because of what's not right within the ANC. So I've never changed my mind about this.
But has the question, has the ANC itself renewed itself? And do you think it's enough for the former president to urge voters to vote for the ANC based on the party's promise to change and do better? Because I don't think that's enough. What do you have to show the people that you're telling to give the ANC another chance that proves that the party has been serious about renewing and cleansing itself? Right? So did the former president at least demonstrate to potential voters what the ANC has done that shows its commitment to renewal? Because the ANC has been preaching renewal, that renewal message for a very long time, for years now. And yes, there are things that have been done that show that the party is still trying to fix itself. But has it done enough to convince people to give it another chance? The former president's presence in the election campaign is no doubt going to have an impact. It's probably going to create some kind of a moral dilemma for many potential voters, perhaps those who have possibly walked away from the party yet. They have walked away, but they still have great admiration for the former president. I mean, he's one of the few remaining voices of reason in the ANC. So the question I'm asking you tonight is, do you think the former president's campaign for the ANC will boost its electoral outcomes? So will the former president Thabo Mbeki save the ANC as it faces this possibility of dipping below 50%? And maybe you're a voter who was still unsure. Maybe you're a voter who had written off the ANC in these elections, but when you see the former president on the ground campaigning, that maybe changes your mind. Send us a WhatsApp voice note right now on 078 459 1897. That number is on your screens right now, 078 459 1897. Remember to tell us your name and your surname and where you're sending the voice note from. Please keep the voice notes to 30 seconds. Alternatively, you can send us an X on @face_the_nation SABC. After the break, we're going to go through some of your comments, feedback, and then we're going to start the conversation with the ANC's head of elections, Mdumiseni Ntuli. Stay with us here on Face the Nation. Welcome back. Now, we've been asking you a question tonight on whether you think the former president Thabo Mbeki's campaign for the ANC will boost the party's electoral outcomes. Let's take a look at some of what you've had to say on X. Sipho Piri says it's definitely giving positive results, judging by Ramaphosa's enemies. They were banking on Mdumiseni Msimanga's almost departure. They pinned their hopes on Mbeki's poetic questions. Ramaphosa must be doing something right. That's a message there from Sipho Piri. Mkonto Maxwell says, I think it's good for the ruling party to have their former leaders coming back to rescue the ship when it's sinking. You sometimes, when you lose your way, you go to the elders for guidance. It's what I see the ANC is doing. Thank you so much for your tweets and your voice notes as well that are coming through. To repeat that number, if you want to respond to that question on the voice note line, you can send us your voice notes on 078 459 1897 or send us an X at Face the Nation SABC. Now, as the countdown continues to the May 29th general elections, the former president Thabo Mbeki says he will be seen more on the ANC campaign trail. Over the weekend, the ANC president Cyril Ramaphosa announced that Mbeki, along with other prominent ANC figures such as Kgalema Motlanthe, David Mabuza, Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka and Baleka Mbete, would be enlisted to strengthen their campaign efforts. Mbeki says the concerns he raised in the past about the ANC are shared by most South Africans. Facing the Nation tonight is the ANC's head of elections, Mdumiseni Ntuli, who joins us in studio. Mdumiseni, thank you so much for making time for us. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much, Clement. Good evening to you and also good evening to the viewers at home. And thanks for inviting us here this evening.
How difficult was it to convince the former president to join the campaign trail on the ground in ANC regalia, talking to people on the streets?
Well, he did not need to be convinced. He made the point sometimes last day, if not the day before, a year before last, in which he said publicly that as a member of the ANC, he, like all of us, has a responsibility to do the work of the party. And you recall that long before he made that statement, he was already intervening in various structures of the movement in provinces, helping us properly to theorize and position the movement appropriately in terms of addressing this challenge of the organizational renewal. And that was essentially, I think, communicating a message that he has made a decision that is going to ensure that the ANC is successful again in the elections that we're going to. So when he made the statement last year, if not early this year, that I'm going to be engaged in the campaign of the ANC, for those of us who are in the ANC, we knew that, it's something that he has already made a determination about it a long time ago, and he has never said he's not going to campaign for the organization.
What difference do you think him being on the campaign trail will have on your electoral outcomes? I mean, you're facing the possibility of dipping below 50%.
Mr. Clement, there is nobody in this country, no political party as well except the ANC, that today has the experience as well as the knowledge of how to run a democratic state in the Republic of South Africa. Nobody else has ever had that experience since ever the inception of our country.
Because nobody has been given that chance.
That's correct. Secondly, President Mbeki is among the first generation of our leaders who did not only participate in conceptualization of the new dispensation before 1994, but also became one of the preeminent leaders as first deputy president of the Republic and later on a president. So his knowledge and expertise, his experience, his understanding of the movement, and his knowledge and interpretation of the challenges that continue to haunt our country and the democratic state, I think are unparalleled. I cannot imagine anybody in this country who has that deep knowledge and experience better than President Thabo Mbeki. So his involvement in the campaign of the ANC is essentially a message to the electorate in this country that we have a fundamental task to undertake, which is to defend the movement and to ensure that the ANC remains a governing part of our country, not for its own sake. I will explain this later. This is essentially about the fundamental task of defending our democracy in this country. You remove the ANC, certainly nobody who can remove the ANC at this stage and gain a majority to govern this country. You are going to lead this country into a major chaos and a crisis than what we're experiencing now. So his intervention is about the recognition of that fact that besides being a member of the ANC, all South Africans must be engaged and be persuaded to understand that returning the ANC into power is not for its own sake, but it's for the democratic project to be consolidated as we advance to the next 8 years of
What do you say to people who say, but the very same ANC has destroyed that very democratic project? And I hear what you say about if you are voting differently, understand that you are bringing this country into uncharted territory. But surely people can be held hostage by the ANC because, we fear that we don't know where this country is going to go if we get into a coalition. If people are not happy about how you have governed over the last 30 years, they've got every right to go and change their votes, whether that's going to bring uncertainty or not.
The overwhelming majority of the South African people will agree with me when I say the ANC-led government from 1994 maybe up to a certain period in time in the around 2008, has done exceptional well, including in terms of how the economy of this country had performed. There are indicators, there is evidence which we can deal with about the extent to which under the ANC-led government, for the first 15 years of our democratic dispensation, things that were never experienced by the South African people happened under the ANC. Of course, I will be the first to admit that the period starting from 2008, maybe up to now, certain new developments emerge. Some of them as a result of what one will say is the objective conditions, which the ANC had no control over. And of course, others are as a consequence of our own subjective weaknesses, the movement, and the issues that come with being an incumbent. You will remember in 2008 that we have a global challenge of the economy. And surely that, as you know, it impacted on our own economy as South Africans and led to a number of people losing their jobs. And soon after that, we then had to be confronted by the crisis of the COVID-19 and that chaos of an unrest that took place in KZN. Now, those factors impacted negatively on the state of the economy of this country, as a consequence of which it delayed our effort to overcome the legacy of poverty, unemployment, and inequality in our country. Of course, there are also instances where, as a movement leading the democratic state, we committed certain mistakes. But Clement, I want to say to you, if you don't want to make mistakes, you just have to do nothing. The fact of the matter is that others may say we were not going to make the mistake that the ANC committed. It's easy to say that because we have no experience. But as pathfinders, the African National Congress, we understand that any journey can be better understood by the one who has physically and literally walked the path. So we do accept that, and South Africans understand very well as we do, that in this journey, complex, the process of social transformation is a complex undertaking. Mistakes will be committed. The best that you can do as a leadership, which is what we've acknowledged, is to accept your own mistakes and to act in ways that seek to overcome those mistakes for the future.
But have you done that?
In many ways we have. I want to give you examples. A few years ago, with the crisis with SARS as an institution, it was failing to generate the revenue that is required by the democratic state in order to address these challenges of poverty, unemployment, and inequality. President Ramaphosa appointed a new commission of inquiry. It produced a report which directed the democratic state on how to act to overcome that crisis. Me and you, I think, would be the witness today that SARS is on its path, on an upward trajectory. And for the very first time after the destruction that was taking place, it is generating a revenue more than what they are actually projected in a year. I know that many people may not believe that we are making progress in addressing the challenges within Eskom. The complexity of the situation in Eskom and the internal intervention which has undermined the functionality of that institution has caused a huge chaos in the country. But if you look at the past few weeks, a great deal of work has been happening as a consequence of which Eskom is
which is suspicious on its own, because a lot of South Africans have been subjected to higher stages of load shedding. But now, coincidentally, even as the electricity minister said, suddenly we've not been experiencing power cuts. And yes, maybe it is because of the interventions that have been made by the board, by the CEO, by the Minister of Electricity. But to South Africans who, over the last couple of years, couple of months, were subjected to higher stages of load shedding, they see that as suspicious. I want to pick up on you mentioning SARS. I think you're right. That's one of the successes, really. We've had the commissioner at SARS, Edward Kisvetter, here a week ago on the show. But let's look at some of the things that you've created yourselves as the ANC, because I hear you. Any path, you learn from mistakes. And what's better is when you do things that are different from those mistakes. But when you look at what has today become the biggest crisis and the biggest risk to our economy, that's Eskom. And I would add that Transnet is equally the biggest risk to our economy. Part of the reason we've got a sluggish economy is because of this. That's partly the biggest reason. But when you look at how the ANC has handled it, do you think that you've handled it in a way that demonstrates we're serious about renewal, changing? Because the people you've deployed, for instance, at Eskom, are the reason we're sitting with the problem.
There were a few years that in which, Clement, we have not handled the institution you are referring to very well.
What are the consequences for that? Who's been held accountable? Because it's not enough to say we've learned our mistakes. We need consequence management.
Sure, you are quite correct. And I'm also sure that you are aware that when the government led by President Cyril Ramaphosa was recognizing the depth of the problem and decided to appoint commissions of inquiries, certain decisions and recommendations were made by those commissions of inquiries. Yes, of course, the pace at which the people who are supposed to be arrested, prosecuted, and be jailed may not be as we would want to see it as South Africans.
Why?
But the fact of the matter is that it's very uncommon that a government of the day will make a conscious decision to say that we're going to appoint a commission of inquiry because there is sufficient suspicions that something is happening which is not consistent with the values of the movement, but also not in the best interest of the people of South Africa. So that intervention on its own It's part of leadership.
But to be fair, sorry, Sizwe, not Sizwe, Mdumiseni, to be fair, you didn't just appoint the Commission of Inquiry out of your own goodwill. There was a recommendation from the public protector, Thuli Madonsela, at the time, who said this is necessary.
Sure. Thuli Madonsela herself was a leader of an institution that is a creation of our democratic dispensation. It's the ANC-led government and the National Liberation Movement which had conceptualized and decided on the importance of the existence of such institutions. And you know why that was done. It was exactly to ensure that you have institutions that are going to safeguard our democracy, protect its credibility, but equally help the government of the day to point to them in instances where there are challenges that are compromising the democratic project. So what Madonsela was done, and many others who are leading and have led our democratic institutions, is not something that we would say, had they not acted in that way, the ANC was not going to do anything about wrongdoing that was taking place in those institutions.
Let's look at what happened after her recommendation. The current Chief Justice Raymond Zondo led a commission of inquiry that came up with recommendations. Have those been implemented by the ANC?
Many of them have. For instance, there are instances where the recommendations were about the conduct and suspected conduct of some of our leaders in the movement. What's
happened to them?
And some of them have been charged by the prosecution authority, and some of them not yet been charged by the prosecuting authority, but because they were fingered in the report, the National Executive Committee of the ANC took a decision that we have to refer their matters to the Integrity Commission. And this case, these are people, comrades, who are not being charged, but where there is some form of clout or a suspicion hanging over their heads. But a movement that is on the path for renewal, which on its own is also a very complex undertaking because it would always face contradictions internally, was able to take a decision that you of our comrades, while we would not conclude that there's something wrong you have done, but we must refer you to a process which would either clear your name or confirm the allegations that have been leveled against you so that you can face the necessary consequences.
But some of them have made it on your parliamentary list.
Well, you would have heard the SG. He made the point following the meeting of the National Executive Committee, he communicated our position that this list must be understood as part of the work in progress. And the reason why he made that statement was because at the time we were to finalize the list, the work that is undertaken by the Integrity Commission was incomplete. But we accepted as a National Executive Committee that until that work has been finalized, we would not be in the position to point fingers and merely sniff comrades and suggest to them or direct them not to be part of the list.
But you're not sniffing comrades. You're looking at a document, recommendations of the state capture inquiry and what that inquiry has found. I mean, let's take, for instance, Zizikota.
Sure.
The state capture inquiry says this man received money from an executive at EOH.
You are quite correct, yeah.
There was no reason. And Zizikota was asked later on, what did you do? He said, I was broke. But when you look at the evidence, he used that money to go buy an expensive Jeep. What does that communicate to a voter when someone like that is still added on a parliamentary list and the president still feels comfortable to have them in his cabinet with overwhelming evidence that has not been denied that comes out of the state capture inquiry? Does that demonstrate a party that's serious about renewal?
Look, let me answer your question in this following manner. As an organization, we have internally very elaborate processes which essentially set us apart from all other political parties. We are the only party that takes certain actions against a comrade or a leader of the movement, even if they are not criminally charged by the prosecution of our country. Which means we have set the path into the direction that says the leadership of the movement must be beyond reproach. And being beyond reproach means that even if you are not criminally charged by a state institution, if your conduct has a potential to tarnish the image and the standing of our movement, we have to do something about that. The only problem with the processes leading to the finalization of the list was that the Integrity Commission, which is our internal mechanism to ensure that we insulate the movement from those who are associated or alleged to be engaged in wrongdoing, had not concluded its exercise at the time at which we had to submit the list. And so we had to take a political decision as a leadership that subject to this process is being finalized, there would be no harm at this point in time in having a list that is made up of 95, 96% outstanding comrades in terms of their experience, in terms of their capability, their qualification, youth and women. It cannot be set back by merely 2 or 3 comrades whose matters are still going to be
So
finalized.
in other words, once the Integrity Commission completes its report,
sure,
there are people that are on the parliamentary list for the ANC that may not make it to parliament.
If the conclusion of the Integrity Commission is that this and that other comrade do not qualify to represent the African National Congress, I have no doubt in my mind that the ANC leadership will have no difficulty to arrive at a decision that says we've got to respect the outcome of this process.
Why haven't you expelled the former president, Jacob Zuma, yet?
Look, Zuma has walked away from the ANC. And when he walked away from the ANC, he then sustained a level of confusion at which he was communicating to the public that he remains a member of the ANC but is not going to vote for the ANC, which resulted into the National Executive Committee taking a very appropriate decision to subject him to a disciplinary processes in which he has to answer for these things about him being a member of the ANC but campaigning against the African National Congress. Now, of course, DC processes in the ANC, they take their own time. That's one of the reasons why, because we don't want to act arbitrarily. We understand very well in the movement that he has departed from the ANC, he has parted ways with us, but we have an obligation as a sitting leadership of the ANC to properly implement and respect the constitutional provisions of our constitution.
But you didn't respect that immediately after the former president announced that he's going to be campaigning for a different... My understanding, and help me understand, my understanding of the ANC constitution when I read it is, once he made that address, that was a classic case of ill discipline. And on that basis, you can take action against him. But I remember interviewing several leaders who said, no, we don't want to give him too much energy. We don't want to give him too much publicity. We'll deal with him after the elections. That's not you relying on the rule book of the ANC.
Sure. Look, you had him on somewhere in December making a decision that is associating himself with a new political party right towards the end of the year. And the view of the national leadership was that we've got to understand this phenomenon. It's just being unveiled. Let's properly dissect it, how it is going to evolve, what is it. And so the NEC would have to find time to sit down and decide it's the next course of action in response to that kind of a conduct. And when the NEC met, the first decision that we took was to suspend his membership immediately. And that is action in line with the Constitution. And once you suspend somebody's membership immediately, you are therefore required to subject that person into a disciplinary process in terms of Rule 25 of the ANC Constitution. So that is what we did. And we thought it's appropriate to follow that process because as a leadership, we also do not want to project ourselves as comrades who are engaged in some form of witch hunt, where when somebody is misbehaving, we no longer also demonstrate confidence in our internal processes in order to deal with that which is not going well in the organization. We understand that there's been a lot of impatience on the ground by some of our comrades and society in general. Why don't we expel this person? Just wake up and expel. The ANC doesn't work like that. We're a very big institution, and what has made us to survive for more than 112 years is precisely because of our loyalty and ability to implement our own policies consistently over a period of time.
All right, Mdumiseni, I'm going to take a quick ad break. When we come back, we're going to wrap up this conversation with Mdumiseni Ntuli, who is the ANC's head of elections, but also we will take your tweets and your voice notes responding to the question that we're asking tonight on Face the Nation. Do you think that the former president, Thabo Mbeki's campaign for the ANC will boost the party's electoral prospects? We'll play your voice notes and read some of your tweets when we return. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are in conversation with the ANC's head of elections, Mdumiseni Ntuli. The question we're asking you tonight is whether you think the former president, Thabo Mbeki's campaign for the ANC will help boost the party's electoral outcome. Can Thabo Mbeki save the ANC from the possibility of dipping below 50%? Here's what some of you have had to say.
Yes, he is campaigning for ANC, will reboost the morale of the community. For those who love ANC, will definitely vote for ANC. This is going to be a positive.
Good evening, Mr. Manyatel. The former President Thabo Mbeki is not the Messiah. ANC is beyond redemption. So they must just sit down and relax. They will be out of power come end of May. I thank you.
Hi, my name is Daniel in Flagstop. They just act out of desperation. They're just using an old man. I don't see any impact because he won't be part of the ANC cabinet come after the election. So he's just talking things that it will never happen. So they're just using that old man for nothing. I don't think it will have an impact. They are just a bunch of losers.
My name is Rolly Kamela. Look, I think this whole thing is about Zuma and Thabo Mbeki, not about Ramaphosa anymore. It's Zuma versus Thabo Mbeki. That's all.
Good evening, Clement. You're speaking to Kwete Machila from Potchefstroom. Yes, former President Mbeki's campaign will have a positive impact because he's a man of integrity. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your WhatsApp voice notes. We've also asked you the same question on Twitter, and some of you have sent us your tweets at Face the Nation SABC. Let's look at what you've said there on Twitter. Breezy says it's a smart move to use the former President Thabo Mbeki to campaign for the upcoming elections. He's one of the few remaining loyal leaders with great integrity. Opinion Rumors says ANC talks about past but not future. Ntuli doesn't inspire confidence. We as the youth are ready to vote them out as we did in Metrosm. Comrade Mbeki's availability to campaign for the ANC is history in making following his plus-minus 10 years of not doing so. This will definitely boost the ANC come the 29th of May. Besides his interpretation of the challenges we face as the ANC and as society in general. Amandla. Guguletu says Mbeki's time has lapsed and he cannot use his good reputation to exonerate people who have let us down. No, they should conquer us with their own good reputation, not through Mbeki's. The last one is from Kayaletu, who says, an intellectual indeed, a remaining reference of ethical leadership, as he refers to the former President Thabo Mbeki. We continue now our discussion with Mdumiseni Ntuli, who is the ANC's head of elections. Mdumiseni, I want to ask you about an audio that leaked last week, in which you can be heard asking government departments to submit ANC projects that they will be launching between now and elections because you want to boost your campaign. How are you going to do that without interfering and also just creating that gray area between party and state?
Clement, I'm glad you are raising this question because I think in many ways either we are being distorted deliberately or there's a misunderstanding. The point that I made in the meeting of the ANC was that we are at the end of 3 decades of our liberation. This has not been a journey of the ANC alone. It has been a journey of the people of South Africa, led by the African National Congress and the liberation movement in its entirety. So the point that we're making is that it's important not for the ANC, for the people of this country, for the democratic state to give an account of this journey over the past 30 years. Because when ordinary South Africans are traveling abroad and naturally you become an ambassador of your country when you open your mouth wherever you are, it doesn't matter from which workstation you belong. You need to have an intimate knowledge of what has happened in this country, the success stories, and of course the challenges where they were. So we were saying to our comrades in government, let's demonstrate the trajectory and the great work that has been done by the democratic state from 1994 up to date. And that is not for the ANC. We would have demanded that to anybody else who's in government, because as a country and as patriotic South Africans, we have been into this journey, and we have to have our government as a leader of our country demonstrating not only for ourselves but for the world to know where we come from, where are we, and how do we intend moving from where we are to proceed.
Do you also intend on telling the potential voters about where your failures have been?
We have been doing that. President Ramaphosa has been engaging with the population wherever we've been going, and people have raised their concerns. He has admitted to the shortcomings and setbacks that we've suffered along our way. And the people have responded very well to him. And that is why I'm sure you know that in terms of the political leaders in this country, those who occupy responsibilities in their organization, he remains a leading candidate by far. It doesn't matter which poll comes out, whether those that are opposed to us and those that are appearing to be somehow lenient to the African National Congress. So he has been engaging the population, and the reason why he's polling better than anybody else in terms of the political parties who are contesting for elections and their leaders is precisely because of his honesty to admit to our shortcomings, but not to be timid and to shy away from demonstrating the great work that has been done by the democratic state, because that is not for the ANC, it's for the people of South Africa.
If he is that transparent, then what do you say to voters who say, well, we hear you, President, that's what you say, but why, for instance, do you still have David Mahlobo in your cabinet? This is the man that the high-level review panel that you, as the president, appointed to look into the State Security Agency found that he was involved in the politicization of that agency to a point that it ended up being broken apart and was serving one individual. And yet the president, even knowing very well the findings of that review panel, still thought this is the person who should be in my cabinet.
Well, I'm sure that you would know that among the names of the comrades whose issues were deferred to the Integrated Commission also include the name of Comrade Mahlobo. You know, the President Ramaphosa, and I think this is part of the upbringing in the ANC, is somebody that is very, very loyal to detail and processes. So that when you make decisions on any matter, no matter how difficult and easy the issue you are confronted with, but you have adequately satisfied the processes, and the person who's affected by your decision also recognizes the need for the decision to be made at a particular point in time. So I don't think that the president is naive about all of those things, but he has allowed the processes that are unfolding within the party and those that may be happening in the state to guide him in terms of ultimately taking certain decisions.
Nothing stopped him from saying to David Mahlobo, I
mean, there's nothing stopped. President can remove anybody in the cabinet.
So why did he feel the same man that the high-level review panel says was one of the problematic figures in the State Security Agency? I think, of course,
Clement, it will be difficult for me to precisely respond on behalf of the president on that particular issue.
But does it make sense to you? Because it doesn't make sense to me.
What I understand, which I've learned to understand and accept, is the fact that once a comrade is subjected to a particular process internally in the organization, in which you are also a president of that organization, you too have to be alive to the fact that those processes must be exhausted so that you can make a particular decision. I'm not convinced
by that, because there are other people that were in his cabinet, Nomvula Mokonyane, Batabile. There's a list I can give you that the president decided, I'm not bringing them back, and the processes were not finished, even internal processes around those individuals. Arthur Fraser was also fingered by the high-level review panel. And you know what the president did? After finding out how problematic Arthur Fraser was as the State Security Agency, he appoints him as the Correctional Services Commissioner. How does that make sense when someone claims they believe in ethical leadership and they are serious about the renewal agenda?
Clement, there are many other comrades who have served in the National Cabinet led by President Ramaphosa, whom he has decided to remove, not because they were fingered in one form or another. So I do want us, when we reflect on those that we are making reference to, but to also remember that it is not only about those that may have had certain issues being pointed at them. There are instances where comrades have been changed and removed from cabinet because the president have made a conclusion that he wants to set up his team in a particular way, and this and that other comrade does not fit into that pattern.
Before we wrap up, I'm about to bring in the DA's Gauteng Premier candidate, Solly Msimanga, on the show, who argues that as the ANC, all you've done over the last 30 years is really have broken promises for the people of Gauteng. Do you think that's a fair assessment to make?
He has not been part of South Africa. Me and you and the rest of the overwhelming people of this country, including some of those who belong to the DA, will have difficult to dispute what I said earlier on, that the trajectory of our country from 1994 to 2008 was an outstanding experience to all South Africans in all facets of life. So when somebody stands here and say, this past 30 years has been a destruction of the Republic of South Africa, then I know that one doesn't stay in our country. Or he stays in our country, but is so consumed by expedience, such that he's even naive to the objective reality of the evolution of this democratic dispensation, notwithstanding the challenges that we've had to contend with over the past few years. So when he speaks like that, I know it's just a campaign. In a rational conversation, nobody will believe what he says.
Do you accept, though, that people are paying tax, double tax? So they must get private security, they must get their own water, they're getting their own electricity, because these are the services that you have failed to deliver as the state.
It's part of these setbacks that I'm talking about. When we landed into a situation where the democratic state does not pay into the state of the infrastructure in the country, that obviously affected the provision of water and other basic services.
And who failed to do that infrastructure?
No, I accept. That happens under the leadership of the ANC. But it's the ANC, as I said about SARS and ESCOM, by the way, and Translate, which you mentioned, is the same ANC-led government that is turning the corner in addressing those challenges.
Thank you so much for making time for us. I really appreciate it. After the break, the DA's Gauteng Premier candidate, Solly Msimanga, joins me. Stay with us. Welcome back. The Democratic Alliance's Gauteng Premier candidate, Solly Msimanga, says the ANC has not fulfilled the promises it made to South Africans after coming into power. Msimanga says the current government does not care about dealing with crime, education, corruption, and other challenges that are facing the country. He joins us now in studio to unpack the DA's plans to deal with what he says the ANC has failed to do. Solly, thank you for making time for us. Good evening.
Thank you very much, Clement, and good evening to the viewers.
Why are you so convinced that the ANC has had 30 years of broken promises?
Well, you just need to go and look for yourself. Anybody who then claims that, we are living in cuckoo land must go into Soweto, go into Alexander, where, by the way, in 2019, the president promised 1 million houses to the residents of Alexander. Not a single brick has been laid there. And we can go on. The economy has all but collapsed right now. People are just living on grants instead of finding work. Security, safety and security, and I heard the last bit of your interview where you're talking about how people are now being double taxed. You have to now ensure that you find private security in addition to you paying tax, which should then be providing you with safety and security. I'll give you some stats. Right now, in Gauteng alone, you have 143 police stations. Of those 143 police stations, 40 don't even have holding cells. That's a problem. How many vehicles are we supposed to be having that we don't have? So we cannot even do visible policing. In addition to that, you are sitting with a situation where you're sitting with incompetent policemen and women, not incompetent in terms of what they're supposed to be doing, but the fact that now they're carrying guns that they haven't been to shooting ranges to be able to then remain competent in terms of using those same guns. And the response that we get from that is that we don't have money for bullets, or we haven't been able to then bring in the ammunition into South Africa. Well, we used to have PMP in Pretoria West that used to be the producer, the biggest producer of those. So you're talking about things that have fallen apart. Look at our rail system. Look at where we find our favorability in terms of doing business or attracting investment, and I can go on and on. The education system, the health system, that is all but collapsed. And you tell me if I'm living in a different planet, or those that are coming here and saying everything is hunky-dory in South Africa living in a different planet. Before I ask you about what plan you have as the DA to respond to
particularly here in Gauteng, where you feel the ANC has failed. When you look at the ANC's track record over the last 30 years, I mean, it would be naive of you and I to think that they have done nothing. There are certain things that the organization has done that has advanced lives of millions of people out there. Yes, they've had challenges, they've created their own problems that have taken us many steps backwards. But is it your assessment that they have done absolutely nothing in the last 30 years?
No, I think anybody else who comes out and say that, you know, absolutely nothing has been done will be mistaken. But we now need to then look at the reversing of all the gains that have, been built. At some point, Gauteng only had about 490 people on the housing backlist. The list is now sitting at 1.23 million. And Gauteng at some point, at its peak, was able to build about 35,000 houses. Right now, cannot even build more than 10,000 units a year, yet the number is growing. So you have now, because of corruption and corrupt activities, also lessened your own ability to be able to then deliver as government. And these are things that we are saying. Instead of addressing the challenges, they've actually then compounded them and actually ignored them. We are now being told of Tintswalos who are living in a comfortable life. The real Tintswalos out there, I met today 2 young people who were born in 1990. One is called Nkululeko, one is called, I forgot his name, but they are twins from Zola, Soweto, holding mechanical engineering degrees. Today, if you look in my tweet, you'll see the 2 young men. I'm pleading for them to actually then be absorbed somewhere. This is the reality of so many of the young people out there who are saying we find ourselves in a life of drugs, we find ourselves in a life of poverty after our parents have sacrificed so much. Now that is the Tintswalo that is out there. And this is something that we have to then ask and say, are we willing to allow this to happen for a further 5 years? Or are we going to be asking what is then the plan? And maybe this is something that we now need to then talk to. What are the plans now going forward? We have now started what we call an infrastructure master plan. Panyaza will tell you, since 2014, I have been saying ad nauseum, where is Gauteng's infrastructure master plan? We don't have an infrastructure master plan that talks to how we deal with the issues of electricity in Gauteng, how we deal with the issues of water, and you see the water shortage. In fact, in Johannesburg, there's certain areas that have water shedding that is becoming a reality. You're having roads that are exploding, roads that are falling apart, rail infrastructure that is now almost depleted and gone. You having, sewer plants that are not being maintained for a very, very long time, which also has other, impacts in terms of the environment. You now go into the Vaal River system and see the amount of problems that is created there. So, and the problems go on and on. We are saying that infrastructure master plan talks to how we are able to then look at municipalities, bring them together, have an infrastructure master plan that connects all the services that municipalities are dealing with. Cost that, be able to raise money at a provincial level, assist municipalities in terms of then rolling that out. That's the first thing. The second thing is we are saying let's make sure that we petition the national minister. Clement, you and me can agree. The crimes in Limpopo, in the Northwest, and the crimes in Gauteng will be very different. And therefore, you cannot have a one-size-fits-all or a blanket approach in terms of how you deal with this. This is why we are saying provinces must actually be given much more power to be able to employ, train, deploy, policemen according to what we need. Right now, as I said, 143 police stations that we're sitting with. There's a 42% vacancy rate in terms of visible policing, 52% vacancy rate in terms of detective and intelligence work. And you wonder why you're not able to then get as many cases resolved as quickly as possible and with the great amount of success. That is what we're sitting with. And this is why you're not able to then attract the number of investors that you should be attracting into your country or into your province in this instance. Because we're not dealing with the fundamentals, we're not dealing with the basics. And you deal with that, you will be able to then attract investment that we should see more and more people getting into jobs, more people working instead of relying on the 350, which is, by the way, coming to an end.
What do you say to South Africans who are listening to you and say, well, we hear you, Solly, but how different are you guys from the ANC politicians?
Well, first of all, I don't think that we are beholden to any structure within what is actually happening now in government. So there is a need, and there's a clear need for us to be able to then do a proper cleanup in terms of government at a provincial level. We are coming with a track record where we are in government in the Western Cape, yes, people will want to then point at Tshwane and a number of examples there, which we've owned up before. But we are coming where in the Western Cape, with all its problems, have been proven. If you look at the amount of employment that we've been creating there, if you look at the amount of services that we have been able to then deliver into the same areas that some would want to then say no, you're not delivering services, we have been able to then do.
Let me ask you why I'm asking that question. Glad Africa contract. I'm glad that you always remember that it was under your tenure. Does that demonstrate good governance on your part?
What you should be asking is what happened with that. Because I took a report to council and said to council, we must go and investigate it. Guess who stopped it? It was the ANC and the EFF that says, no, this report cannot serve in council.
But was that a regular or an irregular tender?
No, it was regular. Because what we said is that there was, from the city manager, a permission that has been granted from National Treasury to then say you can then get the panel. What needed to then happen is to then look at how certain contracts within, once the project management started going. That's what we wanted to do.
Why was it set aside then if it was regular?
Come again?
Why was it set aside?
No, it was an issue about the awarding of contracts to one member of the panel instead of other members of the panel. That was what was.
But that's a governance issue.
Yes, but then those are things.
As mayor of Tshwane.
But those are things that I'm saying to you. The track record speaks for itself, and there's minutes to this to then say this is what has been brought to Meko. When we found out that there were some discrepancies in terms of what has been brought to Meko and what actually then happened, we didn't hide. We took that, we went to council and say, these are some of the things that are coming out. We would want to have a further investigation, but you cannot do that on your own. You need council's approval for you to be able to do that. And we couldn't get the majority because the EFF and the ANC then said, we're not going to allow you to do that.
What about the chief of staff you appointed without qualifications?
I enjoy, thank you for that as well, because we get to tell South Africans the truth once and for all. First of all, what we did was that we separated what you do in the administrative offices and what you do in the political office. This was somebody who was appointed in the political office of the mayor, not somebody who's responsible for Department of
but the
Water
advert
and
required
energy.
that the candidates have a bachelor's degree.
That's where I'm going with it.
When
When I didn't do what we call the gatekeeping exercise, I don't do that. When the gatekeeping exercise was done, it was done by an external company, and we were then told that everything had been above board. This is why when this thing came up, we didn't hide. We didn't remove this person from one position to another. This person had to then go. And we didn't hide it. We didn't try to then say we're excusing it or we're trying to explain it away.
That's a chief of staff. So before I get any chief of staff, I want to know what qualifications do you have?
But
how
remember,
did you not ask
I sit and get a report from an evaluator. There is an evaluator that comes, an external evaluator that comes and says, here are the CVs of people that you're supposed to be interviewing. We've done what we call gatekeeping exercise or gatekeeping processes. Those gatekeeping processes will do things like check your criminal record, things like qualifications and all of that. I said with something that says you can proceed with these interviews.
All right, Solly Msimanga, the DA's Gauteng Premier candidate, I appreciate your time on Face the Nation tonight, and I appreciate your time watching us on this Thursday night. We'll be back on Tuesday at 8 o'clock. Thanks for watching. Have a great evening. Cheers.